Shon, it's so great to connect today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you.
Before we get to the episode, I do have to say, your brothers have been impactful in my life. One, because your brother Troy lined this up and worked with him when I was at BYU. Your brother Adam is one of my all-time favorite basketball players and teammates. So I just had to put that out there in case they're tuning in. Shon, you've had a great academic career. What lessons have you learned from your research that you would most like to share with others?
Yeah, I'm a business strategy professor at the University of Southern California. Um, I did a PhD at Cornell University. I was at Harvard Business School, and now I'm here. And now I'm running what's called our Business of Energy Transition Initiative, and essentially just looking at and doing research on what is the future of energy, what does it look like, and how does energy play a role in terms of economies and the sectors. And one of the things that I love to teach my students, because I've launched a new class called the Business of Energy in the 21st Century, and one of the foundational principles I reinforce is that the energy is a necessity to all life forms in ecosystems. Right? We need energy. I mean, all life is based on energy, and access to affordable and readily available energy is like the cornerstone of economic growth in all highly developed economies. And if you look at some of the emerging economies, developing economies, such as South Asia, or even Africa, right? Securing a reliable energy supply is like one of their keys to future economic and social progress. I mean, that's how they're going to get to a higher quality of life. So that's what they focus on. And if we look at this globally, right? I just asked my class this like yesterday when I was the first opening. I said, "So, tell me, when was peak coal? So when did demand peak for coal? Nate, when did it peak?"
When was peak coal? Well, I'm
Yeah.
assuming it's, I want to say like, oh, it was probably 20 years ago before we started, caring about the pollution it was emitting. But I'm going to say probably around like 2023.
Yeah. Well, you're pretty close. It hasn't peaked yet, so
Wow.
we're still waiting for that. What about peak petroleum though?
Oh, no insight, but I would just guess similar because the world is growing and the demand for energy in my mind just continues to increase.
That's right. We have not hit that peak. And one of the reasons why is because it's all about the density of energy matters, right? And coal and petroleum have very dense energy. It's easy to store, easy to ship. And if we think about energy, as I just said, right, affordable and reliable and resilient and secure energy is the key to economic growth. And so this is why we value that. Now, at the same time, there's this concern and push for limiting, carbon emissions in the atmosphere. Um, and so there's been a large movement towards what we call lower types of carbon emission technologies, such as, solar or wind. I mean, nuclear plays a role, and we could throw in like some other things like hydropower, geothermal, and happy to talk about all these, by the way. But each of these have like a particular trade-off, right? And so, for example, coal, right? Very cheap, very easy to store, right? Provides a nice baseload energy. That's like the positives. And the negatives is that it can be highly pollutive, not just for like carbon dioxide emissions, but, sulfuric acid, nitric acid types of nitrous oxides that come off of it that can turn into acids in the atmosphere. Um, you know, Same thing with natural gas, right? Very much cleaner than coal, but also produces like carbon emissions in the atmosphere when it's burned. But they do provide like a baseload energy, which is what a lot of people need, right? When we turn on the lights, we expect them to be on. And that's one of the problems with like solar and wind. Like we know the solar only works when the sun's up and wind when the wind's blowing. And so to do that, we have as they grow and take a larger portion of the grid, we have to um, invest in storage capabilities, and that's very expensive. And so that adds to the costs, making that type of energy less affordable.
So I'm so interested in energy, and one of my friends growing up was a chemical engineer, and so he would talk to me about the importance of nuclear energy and how nuclear energy is the power of the gods. And it seems like nuclear is making a little bit of a comeback, especially where in my hometown, Idaho Falls, there's a lab where they're building modular reactors. So when you think about nuclear, do you see that playing an increasingly important role? And will nuclear ever become the primary source, or do you think it's always going to be a balancing act between all of these different sources?
For on that first point, yes, I think we're seeing a renaissance in nuclear, mainly because of many of the people that have been against nuclear have passed on, and this newer generation, Generation Z, is open to it, and I think that's given like a leeway for us to actually re-engage. And if you look at the risks of nuclear, I mean, it's still pretty low. We have very stringent regulations that keep us quite safe.
Yeah.
Yes, we had the 3 Mile accident, 3 Mile, and we learned from that. And now there's these investments in, as you mentioned, the small modular nuclear reactors. The small part exponentially reduces the risk of these reactors, meaning they're much safer than the large ones. And the modular word that you use is this idea that if you can also build multiple of these in a factory and then install them already built, then the price should go down, thereby allowing them to produce very competitive price baseload energy. So that is the promise of, small modular nuclear reactors. We haven't had one yet licensed and operating yet in this country. Canada's going to be the first one. They're going to beat us in 2027. They've got a
Interesting.
GE Hitachi modular reactor that's kind of come online next to a large nuclear facility. And but we're hoping, right? And a bunch of small players, as you mentioned, like Allo, Oklo, they work with Idaho National Laboratory in southern Idaho to develop these prototypes and to run them. And so we're hoping. Some of the big things that need to happen is we do need to change our regulatory permitting process for these SMRs. Right now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is using the same regulations for these massive 2 gigawatt plants as, say, 100 or 20 megawatt tiny reactor, right? That doesn't make
That makes
sense,
sense. Yeah.
right? And because essentially what you're taking is like, hey, look at all the costs associated with this 2 megawatt plant, and we're going to stick that now on top of a 20 megawatt plant. Oh, but by the way, because it's only 20 megawatts, the revenue they could bring in is like 1/10 or excuse me, 1/100th the amount of revenue as a
Yeah.
2 gigawatt plant. So when would they ever be able to recoup that? I mean, the prices would be so high that they'd have to charge that nobody would want to buy that. So this is the thing we have to think about is the compliance costs because they get added in to what that break even price per megawatt needs to be when they sell that electricity.
So interesting. So hopeful about nuclear, especially if we can figure out the regulations and of course make advancements in technology. And the crazy thing is the amount of waste. It's like, if I remember right, you could power the entire, well, basically, I know nuclear is still in the grid in the US, but like all of the waste from a single year could like fit in like an Olympic sized swimming pool or something like that. So the amount of waste generated, if I remember right, is just very small. Of course, there are other risks. Okay, well, how about solar? I mean, people seem to be very excited about solar. So what role do you see solar playing?
I mean, solar is going to continue to grow. Like it's growing on like residential places, buildings and commercial. The problem again with solar and wind is that after you meet like a certain threshold on a grid, which is around 30%, the costs start escalating. And that's because now you need to stabilize it. You have to maintain a voltage on that grid. And so if the wind's like changing, then you're going to have disruptions in the voltage. And the same with like when the sun goes down for those massive amount of 8 hours. And right now we don't have storage capability for the 8 hours. We have up to 4 hours of storage. But again, in order to build out that storage, you then have to invest in a lot of batteries, which increases that total cost of the energy. The same with the wind to maintain that voltage. So as you build, and so renewables are okay to a certain extent, right? But if you were to power grid completely by solar and wind, the cost would be so high that most of the industries wouldn't be able to operate that we have today in this country. Our manufacturing would be gone. It's just way too expensive. So this is something that Europe's been seeing, right? And they've been experiencing this as they lost that cheap Russian natural gas.
Mhm.
And they're now running a lot mainly on wind and some more expensive LNG to supplement that. And the prices have been very high and volatile.
So people talk about, transitioning to all electric cars. Uh, where does most of the energy come from that charges those batteries? Is it coming from renewable sources, or is it still coming from coal and other less clean sources, which in effect, and that's what I'm wondering, like, are we just using the same quote unquote dirty sources to power the electric cars?
Yes, the majority of the electrons in this country are coming from fossil fuels, coal and natural gas.
Okay.
So, and that's where we're going with that. And yeah, coal has continued to decline more, but we're seeing that uptake of combined cycle natural gas is taking its place because we have an abundance of natural gas. But the important thing to think about these electric vehicles, right, is I like to see it, it's essentially we're just offshoring the pollution, right? So even if we were to power a grid completely by electricity, like in the state of California, by renewables, and it's very expensive, right? If you do that, but you could in this small state, in the state of California, right? You have to take into account the pollution that was used to create those batteries,
Yeah.
to mine those rare earths, right? All that's offshored, right? And we don't take that into account. But when you do the full life cycle analysis, if we care about what type of pollutants, whether it's water pollutants or air pollutants or carbon emissions, I mean, electric vehicles are not that friendly, and we need to consider that if this is really what you care about. In fact, there's been estimates shown that you have to drive an EV 100,000 miles to be able to get to the point where you're actually going to become less carbon intensive than like your very small internal combustion engine.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm intrigued by this because I'm literally picking up my first EV on Saturday. I obviously want to do what's best for the environment, but this makes me, this conversation just reminds me that there are no simple solutions. And one of my favorite quotes is, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And just like in this short discussion, that's what we're saying, right? Like
That's right.
there is no magic bullet. There's always trade-offs.
Exactly. There's a trade-off in everything, and well, I think a great way to think about energy systems is that having a nice portfolio of different energy sources is a good way forward because it helps increase your resiliency for any type of like shock in the system,
Mhm.
right? You got a little bit of coal, some natural gas, some renewables, some hydro, nuclear, geothermal. You had a bunch of this together, right? Then you're in a pretty good, situation to withstand like potential shocks in the supply. One of the great things about this country is, and this is becoming, I believe, more important as geopolitics becomes, a bigger issue moving forward between the major countries and the risk of war and trade sanctions and tariffs is the resiliency. So in the United States, we have three different types of like infrastructures. We have a liquids infrastructure from like petroleum fuels. We have a gas infrastructure with the pipelines, and we have an electric infrastructure, right? That is fantastic if you think about this, right? Because if you have, I'm just take Los Angeles, you have, massive like earthquake that happens, power lines go down for 3 weeks. Well, we could power what we needed through gasoline driven generators or natural gas driven generators
Yeah.
because those pipelines in the ground aren't going to be affected by, um, an earthquake. And the same thing in Florida when they had the massive hurricane and the risk of that hurricane coming in, right? That could knock out the power lines. Well, you need to have some sort of other additional energy source as a resiliency. So this is something we always have to think about as well, right? We want energy, we need it, and these shocks are going to occur, and they may be increasing. And if that's the case, then how can we have a very diversified portfolio of energy sources?
Yeah, that's the interesting term, right? A diversified portfolio of energy sources. And I just it just doesn't seem like the demand for energy is going down as we talk about it. And I especially think of this in terms of AI. AI compute, I mean, the power that is required to run these models is just massive. And so how do you see the growth of AI and even potentially crypto? What role do you see those technologies playing in the demand for energy?
Oh, it's increasing 100%. And we've seen a confluence of two things happening over the last 5 to 6 years. One has been the closing of baseload energy coal plants, which have reduced electrons to the grid, especially baseload energy, which is the most valuable, right? At the same time, we've seen increasing demand for electrons through more data centers coming online. And like you said, the AI data centers use up to 10 times more energy than the GP or the CPU data centers. But we're seeing that grow. And so we've got this confluence of greater demand, less supply. And now data centers are scrambling around the country just to find an area where they can hook up. If we look at Northern Virginia and like Loudoun County, where most of the data centers in this country are located, data centers now have a wait of at least 5 to 6 years to get connected to the grid because there's just not enough power.
Mm.
So what are they doing? Like, we can't wait that long. Like, if you're Alphabet or you're Meta, like, we're competing with each other. We need to get ours up and running. So where are they going? They're going to Louisiana, where there's a lot of gas, assets, or to Wyoming, where they have gas and wind and a little bit of surplus of energy. And as long as they've got a fiber optics cable they can plug into, right, they're sacrificing some latency to their customers
Yeah.
just to be able to get the electrons to power their data centers. So that's where we are right now. And this is why they're very interested in nuclear, because a lot of these technology companies don't want to increase their carbon emissions through, say, like natural gas or coal, these other baseload. But nuclear provides that baseload energy without any type of emissions. So we're going to see now like a greater interest in nuclear, also driven by, memorandums of understanding being struck between these, nuclear power, small modular nuclear power companies, these ventures, and the tech companies.
Yeah, this is so interesting to me too, because it's not also the demand for energy isn't just about billionaires in Silicon Valley trying to make more money. This has real world consequences for developing countries, as you kind of mentioned earlier, right? I mean, this is a matter of life and death to developing countries. And so, of course, we all want to pass on a cleaner planet to the next generation. But I think that there is this trade-off, right? If we just totally prioritize, one way to keep the atmosphere clean is potentially just shut down all burning of coal and petroleum, but that ends up killing a lot of people in the process.
That's right. Yeah, if we didn't have, like I said, those four key factors, right? Ammonia, cement, steel, and plastics. I mean, fossil fuels, that they're the cornerstone behind those four things. So I mean, just take ammonia. We take that off the market, we would starve. Half the population would probably die in a matter of a few years.
Interesting. Ammonia. See, I didn't know ammonia was
Ammonia
something.
is the is like the foundation of fertilizers.
Mm,
So if we don't have these fertilizers, think about the Green Revolution, right? That basically ended mass starvation that we saw before in the 1960s. It started happening, right? And we've been blessed with this abundance. In fact, we produce now more food with fewer acreage in this world than we've ever done,
yeah, that's
right?
amazing.
And you take away the fertilizer, those yields are going to drop by double digit percentages, 60, 70%. And when you take that amount of food off the line, right? I mean, we may be okay in our country,
Yeah.
right? Maybe that, because we've got enough money, we could probably feed ourselves. But the rest of the countries with lower GDP per capita, no.
Well, Sean, I want to take your class. Have you written a book on this? I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this. This is so interesting. We're running out of time here. Maybe
Yeah,
any,
definitely sign for the class. We're one of the first in the country to have the business of energy in the 21st century. It charts through the entire, it's to provide students with like a sort of like the foundational economics of the energy sector and understanding, where do you get these returns and where are great investments. And, it goes from the fossil fuels, from coal all the way to like carbon markets and sequestration. Then we move into electric markets to some of the more newer technologies like wave and tidal that are happening off of Scotland, right? And what's the potential there? Should you invest in it? And we talk about these types of things. But there are also implications for the rest, right? Is it a valuable product? And this is the key, just to conclude with this, right? One of the things I say with all the students is like, you're in business. You're in the business of energy. That means you've got to create a product that has a lot of value. What is a valuable product in energy? Something that balances energy security, safety, affordability, reliability, and cleanliness. If you can balance these five factors, you're going to produce a very valuable product that people are going to be willing to buy.
it's it's so easy for us on a day to day to underappreciate the value of energy, but it's like the heart of all life, as you said earlier, right? I mean, energy is what makes society and life possible, and our ability to harness it is what has truly led to the greatest boon in economic, not just economic growth, but just life expectancy for all
Exactly.
humanity. So,
And easiness, right? I mean, look, we're able to communicate right now on this Zoom and not have to like travel together or do this over an analog phone.
yeah. Oh, thanks, Danny. Well, Sean, I loved it. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today. I can't wait to share this and listen to this again. And I want to keep learning about this. So either if you write a book, let us know, or if you expand this class to the public, let us know because I want to keep learning about this.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.